All right, here we go. Just the last few seconds loading here, folks. Okay, we are live. I'll pass it over to you, Sarah.
Great, thank you. This will be the ongoing battle to remember to unmute myself as we get going today. So I want to thank you all for attending this town hall on the environment for Coquitlam-Burke Mountain. My name is Sarah McNeil. I use the pronouns she and her. I'm the development manager with the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, British Columbia, and I'm pleased to be here getting us started tonight. So we're with you on Zoom, we're streaming live to Facebook, and we'll also have a captioned version of the debate available on our YouTube channel on Monday. This election is coming at a time of incredible change. Before us all is a critical choice, a decision that could shape what our world looks like, not just a year from now or 4 years from now, but for generations to come. The coinciding climate and biodiversity crises can no longer be ignored, and we're also in the midst of a pandemic. So we are really honored to be hosting this critical conversation with all of you tonight. We'll begin with questions to the candidates momentarily, but I want to first acknowledge that Coquitlam-Burke Mountain is located on the unceded, unsurrendered, and stolen lands of the Coquitlam First Nation and lies within the shared territories of the Cutsey, Stolo, Kikite, Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. I invite everyone watching and listening to recognize the unbroken relationship between Indigenous peoples and their lands and waters, and to honor their ongoing stewardship of the incredible places where we all live, work, and play. I'd like to remind you all that this event, like all virtual events hosted by CPAWS-BC, is governed by our community guidelines for online spaces. The link to those guidelines can be found in both the Zoom chat and the Facebook comments. And now I want to introduce you to our moderator. Hussein Aladina is a political science and dialogue graduate from Simon Fraser University. He has spent the last 5 years as a Juno-nominated artist, producer, and DJ in the Metro Vancouver music industry. With a passion for environmental justice and a unique skill for digital marketing, Hussein has recently joined our CPAWS-BC team as the digital engagement coordinator, and we couldn't be more pleased to have him aboard. Hussein, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And before I start, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm coming from the unceded and stolen lands of Indigenous people, specifically the Siamu, Katsi, and Kwantlen First Nations, colonially known as Surrey. I'm grateful to live on these lands and grateful to be with you tonight. And if there's anyone that you think that should be with us tonight, please feel free to send them a direct link to our Facebook Live or share the link on your social media. You'll see the direct link, the direct Facebook Live link in the chat box. So here's how our program will go. Each candidate will be given 1 minute to introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about their background. Once they've spoken, I will pose questions on a range of topics, from pandemic recovery to endangered species. The order of response will alternate as we work our way through the questions, and the candidates will have 90 seconds to respond. If time management isn't your strong suit, you can keep your eye on Sarah, who will be giving you a 30-second and a 10-second warning, and will ring a bell if you run over time. Worst comes to worst, she can also hit the mute button, so I'm just putting that up there. The first 5 questions were provided to the candidates in advance. With any remaining time, we'll take questions from the audience. Some questions have already been submitted. You can add your question using the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen and can upvote questions submitted by other attendees. We will choose questions that are popular among those watching and focused on the environment to pose to the candidates later in the end of the town hall. Following the questions, each candidate will have 2 minutes to give closing remarks. And now, without further ado, over to Adam Bremner-Akins of the BC Green Party to introduce himself. Adam, you have 1 minute.
Oh, you're on mute still, Adam.
It was bound to happen eventually. I mean, may as well just start off that way, right? So, but my name's Adam Bremner-Akins, and I am running for the BC Greens to represent Coquitlam-Burke Mountain. I am honored to be living on the stolen land of the Coast Salish peoples. And I want to thank everybody who put this debate together tonight, as climate change and the environment is one of the biggest issues personally and in this election. I am a climate activist. I went to school at Terry Fox Secondary. I'm a political science student at SFU currently. And I have organized many nonpartisan climate strikes. I have worked with Fridays for Future to organize local climate strikes at my previous high schools. I have taken inspiration from figures such as Greta Thunberg and AOC and continue to fight for climate justice. Thank you very much.
Great. And now, Fin, if you'd like to do your introduction.
Thanks, Hussein. My name is Fin Donnelly. I'm your BC NDP candidate in Coquitlam-Burke Mountain. I'm the founder and chair of the Rivershed Society of British Columbia. From 1990 to 2000, I made 14 environmental marathon swims in BC's rivers, lakes, and ocean, including twice swimming the 1,400-kilometer length of the Fraser River to draw attention to its declining health and threats to wild salmon. I was a Coquitlam City Councillor for 7 years and a Member of Parliament for 10 years. As an MP, I founded the All-Party Oceans Caucus, a nonpartisan group of MPs and senators focused on ocean health. I introduced legislation to ban oil tankers off BC's north coast, transition fish farms to land, and shark fin ban, which became law in 2019. From 1995 to 2005, I spoke to more than 60,000 people in hundreds of BC schools and communities about sustainable living. In 1997, I was honored with the name EM Yoyos, which means orca, strong swimmer in the animal world, by the Squamish Nation for my stewardship work.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. So our first question, Fin, you'll have the first answer and then we'll alternate from there. The current health pandemic has shone a light on many parts of our society, which are in need of fixing. Many see the creation of an economic recovery strategy as a time to rethink our current status quo and rebuild a more sustainable and just way. What priorities would you put forward to ensure that a green recovery prioritizes people, nature, and the climate? So Fin, you'll be first. You're on mute though, Fin. Just gotta,
Okay.
There you go.
Thanks, Hussein. So we will protect watersheds and clean water in British Columbia by creating a watershed security strategy to plan, manage, and protect local watersheds for public good. As part of this strategy, we'll seek a partnership with the federal government to establish a watershed security fund for Indigenous, local, and regionally led clean water initiatives, and create good, sustainable local jobs for British Columbians in watershed restoration, monitoring, technology, training, and education. This type of investment will put people to work across our province to restore salmon, forests, wetlands, and drinking water while making BC more resilient to floods, fires, food security issues, and the effects of climate change.
Great, thank you, Fin. Adam, the same question. What priorities would you put forward to ensure that a green recovery prioritizes people, nature, and the climate? You have 90 seconds.
Thank you. Yeah, one of the first policies I would put forward is immediately halt all funding to fossil fuel companies. So that is fossil fuel subsidies, allowing new fracking, allowing new mines to go forward that are damaging our environment. Secondly, I would halt all old growth forest logging because that is detrimental to our environment and we need to protect the remaining old growth forests we have left. I also think what we need to do is set up a study, so we, especially in Coquitlam-Burke Mountain here, a wildlife impact study, but also around the province to see how humans are impacting our environment and how we can reduce that. We also need to set up a $500 million fund to support sustainable jobs so that we can transition our oil and fossil fuel workers away from those damaging industries and into ones that'll better prepare us for the future. We also need to develop a clean jobs program focused on enhancing BC's natural assets, such as tree planting that is sustainable, so not monocropping our trees for second and third growth forests, but making sure we have sustainable forestry so that we can use our wood products and while protecting the environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. Okay, to our next question. British Columbia has a whopping 1,807 species of animals and plants at risk of extinction. That is more than any other province or territory in Canada. This includes boreal caribou and the southern resident killer whales, two species which have gained a lot of media attention. Scientists tell us that extinction of these unique species can be avoided by putting strong recovery plans into practice. Habitat destruction is the most significant issue that is threatening wildlife. The Government of Canada recently committed to protecting 25% of lands and oceans by 2025 and 30% by 2030. A recent survey found that almost all British Columbians support the idea of the BC government protecting at least 25% of lands and oceans in the province as well. If elected, how would your government meet or exceed these targets to protect critical ecosystems and stabilize our climate through natural conservation? How would you prioritize urgent habitat protection for species like caribou or orca? Adam, you're up first.
Thank you. So immediately we need to identify our high-risk ecosystems. So ecosystems where we have orca, where we have salmon dwindling, and we need to protect those at all costs. Those need to be our highest priority. And that would be something that we can look at within setting up a program to analyze our high-risk ecosystems within BC. Secondly, to protect our animals like our caribou and our salmon, we need to secure the freshwater waterways so that we have clean water and we have less shipping traffic. So for instance, salmon and orcas are being, as we know, are being damaged by these shippings, by the sound of ships, and we need to protect them because we have a very small population of our orcas left. And if they don't recover soon, we'll eventually get down to a population that isn't enough to recover the species. And so a green government is willing to not only protect every high-risk ecosystem in the province, but we're willing to look beyond and say, how can we utilize our environment to help us deal with climate change? So that includes protecting carbon sinks like swamps so that we don't have to release those emissions already trapped in the ground. We look at restoration of damaged land through mines or creating new urban wildlife habitats so that species who are struggling but are in urban environments can have the opportunity to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Fin, how would your government meet or exceed targets to protect critical ecosystems, stabilize our climate, and prioritize urgent habitat protection?
Thanks for the question, Hussein. We worked with the BC Greens to develop Clean BC, a continent-leading plan in which we aim to be net carbon neutral by 2050, in sync with the federal government. We introduced accountability legislation requiring government reports by the minister each year on progress made, including input from an independent council. Our government has taken significant steps to protect the natural heritage that British Columbians are so proud of. We responded to immediate priorities, including the protection of grizzly bears, old growth forests, and critical salmon habitat and populations. Everything is connected. Salmon feed killer whales and swim up rivers. Bears eat the salmon and fertilize the forests, which caribou and other animals depend on. The BC NDP is committed to working with the federal government, First Nations, and communities to protect critical species like caribou and southern resident killer whales, their habitats and ecosystems.
Thank you both for your answers. Okay, question 3. Experts agree a healthy ocean is vital to people and communities. Oceans moderate climate, clean the air, and support ecological and cultural economic well-being. A recent survey of British Columbians found that 94% of people view ocean health as either very important or extremely important, including 100% of the respondents surveyed in Coquitlam. Marine protected areas are a tried and tested tool to improve ocean health. If elected, how would marine protected areas fit into your government's plan of a healthy ocean and coastal communities? Fin, you have the first response.
Thanks for the question, Hussein. Ocean protection generally falls within federal jurisdiction, but we are committed to working with the federal government and First Nations to achieve 25% protection of the ocean by 2025 and 30% by 2030. MPAs are an established tool to improve ocean health. The IUCN says that MPAs need to be legislated, permanent, clearly defined geographically with boundaries, and effectively managed, which I completely agree with and fought for at the federal level. The The province is responsible for almost 30,000 kilometers of shoreline and seabed in the inshore and nearshore waters of BC. As part of our coastal marine stewardship mandate, we have established many marine protected areas which are essential to ocean health and the communities they rely on.
Thank you, Finn. Adam, if elected, how would marine protected areas fit into your plans for a healthy ocean and coastal communities?
Yes, marine protected areas are extremely important, especially because our oceans are so vulnerable with rising sea levels and rising temperatures within our oceans. Also, increased ocean acidification is a problem that we're now seeing have massive effects on corals or sea life that would normally be able to survive in an environment, and they're not anymore. So I think one of the first things that we need to do is look at open net salmon farms and see how they're damaging the environment, and then hopefully remove them from our province. Because they are causing massive damage to our ecosystems and massive damage to wild salmon stock. We also need to invest into our new industries. So we see kelp and seaweed is an up and coming industry in BC, and kelp and seaweed are also great at removing carbon from our atmosphere and from the ocean. So we need to invest in those to make these industries sustainable. We also need to protect First Nations fishing rights, and we need to ensure that we are not overfishing our small populations of fish we have now, because we've seen our salmon stock keeps on going down year over year, and we are increasingly damaging our oceans through shipping traffic and increased fishing in vulnerable areas. So we need to protect those areas immediately before we lose any more species. So, and overall, we just need to make our oceans sustainable. A lot of people in British Columbia rely on our oceans. We rely on it for trade. Many people rely on it for food or for industry. And we need to transition those industries so that they are fishing sustainably and so that we're not destroying the environment while we make a living.
You're on mute, Hussein.
Wow, we're 4 for 4. All of us have made a mistake. Okay, so, and I did say thank you guys for your answers, so I appreciate your thoughtful answers on question 3. Moving on to question 4. On an issue that is very near and dear to CPAWS, BC Park Systems host some of the province's most beautiful and unique places, while also providing some of the most accessible outdoor recreation opportunities. Despite stewarding some of BC's most cherished places, BC's provincial parks have chronically been underfunded since the early 2000s. This past summer, we saw record attendance and demand for outdoor experiences in BC parks, from crashing the reservation website to parking lots full by 9 a.m. on weekends. Parks such as our local favorite Golden Ears Provincial Park appear to be consistently at maximum capacity. If elected, how would your government support a revitalization of provincial parks in BC so that they can support visitors and wildlife for years to come? Adam, you're first for this question. You have 90 seconds.
Thank you. Yeah, our parks have been underfunded for over the last 2 decades now through Liberal and NDP governments. And that needs to change, because not only are our parks extremely important to preserving endangered wildlife, but they do contain some of the most beautiful areas in BC and some of the most beautiful areas in the world. And I think we should also be increasing our protected areas to protect them from logging, protect endangered species, and give more habitat area to endangered animals who may be constrained right now within parks. I think an increase in funding is definitely a priority for BC parks, because as we have seen with COVID-19, that our parks are an extremely important resource. And not only do parks give people an enjoyable space to go camping or spend the day, but we know that nature improves mental health. And along with COVID-19, our mental health in our province, especially among my generation and older generations like seniors, are being hampered. So if we can make parks work not only for the general population, but more accessible to people like seniors and youth, then the parks would be working for us, helping us with our mental health crisis, helping us protect our wildlife, and helping us prevent climate change in our province. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. And Finn, how would your government support a revitalization of provincial parks in British Columbia?
Hussein, thank you for the question. And certainly looking in context, if you look at 16 years of BC Liberals, this is an area where they underfunded our provincial parks and laid off many staff that maintained and took care of our parks, our park system. So it is something that is near and dear to my heart. It's, as you said, Hussein, many British Columbians use and rely on and enjoy our parks. And the deterioration of a decade and a half of commitment from the, or neglect from the BC Liberals has left us playing catch up over the last 3.5 years. And as you mentioned in the pandemic, certainly that was something where I was able to take advantage of Coquitlam-Burke Mountain Park, provincial park, and just a walk up to Crystal Falls and I saw so many other people in the Coquitlam-Burke Mountain area doing a similar thing. Specifically, we will expand BC's popular park system by creating new campgrounds, trails, and protected areas while increasing funding to improve infrastructure and protect park ecosystems. In collaboration with Indigenous leaders, labor, industry, and environmental groups, we will implement recommendations of the Old Growth Strategic Review to protect further old growth forests, in addition to the 353,000 hectares we protected in September.
Finn, thank you so much. Okay. Question 5. Parks and protected areas provide a multitude of benefits, including acting as a nature-based solution against threats like climate change. New research shows that the total number of birds, mammals, amphibians, and reptiles was as high or higher on lands managed or co-managed by Indigenous communities than other protected areas or parks. If elected, how would your government support the protection of management of large interconnected ecosystems on land and ocean in partnership with Indigenous stewards? Finn, you're first.
Thanks for the question, Hussein. In 2019, BC became the first province to enshrine the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in law, setting the table for more meaningful shared decision-making. As we move forward with key decisions on regional land and resource use allocation, we will partner with First Nations, providing a clear, stable, and sustainable path for everyone to work together. We will expand funding for key projects designed to preserve and respect Indigenous cultures, including provincial parks and wilderness areas. The creation of a watershed security strategy and a watershed security fund will help build new kinds of partnerships with Indigenous nations, including the Guardians program. And I want to add on a personal note, I mentioned in the introduction that I was given a name by the Squamish Nation, Iem Yoyos, which I wear that proudly. And they recognize the work that I did as an advocate for salmon, for watersheds. And I will pledge to continue to bring that advocacy to my work as an MLA if elected October 24th.
Great, thank you, Finn. And Adam, how would your government support the protection, management of large interconnected ecosystems in partnership with Indigenous stewards?
Yeah, there is nobody who knows the lands of British Columbia better than the Indigenous populations. They managed it amazingly, ways we can't even imagine now that have been lost due to colonialization. But their land management techniques were amazingly productive. And I think we need to bring that back by giving Indigenous people more control of these lands so that they can protect them. And also, we did bring in UNDRIP, but just months later, it was violated by the NDP government, who was trying to push action on Trans Mountain Pipeline. It was invaded the Wet'suwet'en territories, which is not acceptable. When Indigenous people say they don't want something on their land, it should not go on their land. It is their land to take care of, it is their land to steward, and it is not the province's position to go in and violate that bond. We see reconciliation now with Indigenous people has become a lot harder because we don't listen to our own laws. That needs to change, and we need to give Indigenous people back control of their lands. Also, I think we need to begin to invest in techniques like wildlife highways that we have in BC. Well, we have a few of them in the interior, but we need more ability for wildlife to move back and forth between human settlements, or if we have built roads, so that these wildlife ecosystems can still be interconnected to each other. We have built roads and built fences that prevents them from intermingling with each other, and that needs to change so our ecosystems can flow openly once again. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Adam. Okay, so that is the 5 questions that we gave to the candidates that CPAWS and our campaigners put together. And thank you guys so much for the thoughtful answers. So remember, for everyone that's watching, it's not too late to submit a question. Use the Q&A option on the Zoom, or if you're watching on Facebook, you can chat on the Facebook chat. We also have a staff monitoring that. So I'm gonna go into the questions that are coming in live. Okay, so here's a few questions that were submitted by people watching at home. Laura D asks, can you speak to the utilization of natural assets to make communities more resilient to the effects of climate change? And Finn, we'll start with you, and you still have 90 seconds for these questions as well.
Great, thank you for the question. Definitely natural assets or nature-based solutions are becoming a huge focus, which the federal government has recognized, and I believe we will see more action going forward with an NDP government elected, as well as with municipalities. I mentioned the Watershed Security Strategy and the Watershed Security Fund. It's something that I've been personally working on. We saw $27 million before the election go directly to the implementation of watershed restoration, which is a focus in communities in all corners of British Columbia to work on implementing nature-based solutions or improving our natural assets. We can do a tremendous amount, put people to work with good paying jobs and restore the environment, looking at restoration, building a restoration economy, and making so it's working with the environment as well as improving our economy. So getting people back to work after COVID, incredibly important. So you can work with economic goals, ecosystem goals, and community and social goals, working with First Nations and municipalities. The province is committed to investing in nature-based solutions, as well as working with the federal government. It's a win-win-win.
Great, thank you, Finn. Adam, I'll just repeat it quickly too. Can you speak to the utilization of natural assets to make communities more resilient to the effects of climate change?
Yes, so some of our natural assets are extremely useful. We see like our natural assets, if that's considered in fossil fuels, that needs to be immediately banned, the subsidies of fossil fuels. And that's something that my counterpart has refused to do. He has said it at other times in the House of Parliament, but has refused under a John Horgan government to commit to banning fossil fuel subsidies and to ban fracking, which are extremely damaging to our environment. So those natural assets need to be immediately put on hold. But what we can do is use our natural assets that are sustainable and utilize those to not only benefit local communities within the interior, for instance, the sustainable timber, but we, instead of shipping that just that raw timber off, we can begin to build more mills in British Columbia and try to revitalize that so that we can begin providing jobs to people who need them, who are understanding of the industry and in the industry. This is utilization of sustainable natural assets is extremely important in our transition to a sustainable economy within British Columbia, because our economy is dependent currently on non-sustainable assets. And so if we can transition over to sustainable assets, we get a big step ahead in the fight against climate change. Thank you.
Hussein,
thanks,
could I just clarify that Adam has now said a couple of things that are untrue about the NDP, the BC NDP. I'm happy to clarify the record and speak to that, but just wanted to point that out because I know this isn't really a debate forum, but I do want to recognize that.
Yeah, we were going for a town hall, but in your next answer, if you do want to address that answer and maybe use some time to address that, you're more than welcome to.
Thank you.
Cool. Wow, I just sorry, 1 second. Just lost you guys for a second. There we go. So these are more questions that are coming in. And our staff is behind the scenes choosing questions. So the next one comes from Dylon S. Dylon S asks, in the past 3.5 years, the BC NDP working with the BC Liberals to increase fossil fuel subsidies by 79%, giving LNG companies billions of dollars in taxpayer funding direct subsidies. If elected, is your government committed to eliminating all fossil fuel subsidies? Yes, no, or why? And Adam, you're first on this one, and then Fin, you'll be on after.
Yes, I am excited to announce that BC Greens do stand behind removing immediately all fossil fuel subsidies. We're essentially funding the destruction of our planet, and that is not acceptable. That is not ethical, and it needs to stop immediately so we can begin to transition those oil workers over to new sustainable jobs. Thank you.
Great. And Fin, how does subsidies to fracking companies help meet us clean BC targets, especially as emissions continue to rise? You can answer.
Thanks, Hussein. And I just wanted to correct the record here from what Adam has said earlier about the NDP, the BC NDP. So we worked closely with the BC Greens, and this is where, it's one thing to say that you would cancel all subsidies, but it's another to be actually in the legislature. And when the BC Greens were in the legislature, we worked closely with them to develop Clean BC with Dr. Andrew Weaver as their leader. And that is a continent leading plan in which we aim to be net carbon neutral by 2050 in sync with the federal government. And this plan includes rebates for electric vehicles, home efficiency upgrades, incentives for industry, schools, hospitals, and universities. We introduced accountability legislation requiring government reports by the minister each year on progress made, including input from an independent council. We put an environmental lens on oil and gas royalty credits and are committed to a comprehensive review if re-elected. On a personal note, if elected, I am committed to asking tough questions when that review comes forward and pushing the BC NDP to accelerating our action toward a just transition to a low carbon future.
Great, thanks, Fin. Okay, Christina asks, if elected, will your government commit to significantly increasing salmon habitat by funding and implementing proven fish-friendly solutions for flood control and fish passage? And will you also commit to creating a long-term watershed security fund to protect and restore our watershed? And I think, Fin, you touched on this before, but you can answer first.
Yes, definitely. Thanks, Christine, for the question, and Hussein. That is, as I've already mentioned, the watershed security strategy is something that I am very proud of and would like to and commit to seeing, and certainly if elected, will be a strong advocate for. I was part of a coalition that helped push for the strategy as well as for a watershed fund. We had a commitment from the provincial government for $27 million. And there is also the next step, which is to go after the federal government to match $2 to $1. So ideally, the provincial government would put in at least $200 million, which would be a $400 million match from the federal government, being $600 million that would go towards the creation of salmon, much needed salmon habitat, restoring critical salmon habitat and safe fish passage. These are critical areas. Our salmon are in trouble. They provide food for First Nations, for cultures, for working people in our coast, and also for the endangered southern resident killer whale. So we have to act now. We have to invest. We have to be bold. We have to work together with Indigenous and First Nations, Indigenous and the federal government to ensure that we can bring back our salmon. It's critically important.
Great, thanks, Fin. And Adam, I'll read the question one more time. If elected, will your government commit to significantly increasing salmon habitat by funding and implementing proven fish-friendly solutions for food control and fish passage? And will you also commit to creating a long-term watershed security fund to protect and restore our watersheds? And Adam, you have 90 seconds.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, the BC Green government can commit to that. It is extremely important we protect our salmon and their habitats, not only because salmon provide food for Indigenous peoples and the people of British Columbia, but also they provide food to our orcas and to other species who are also suffering at the low stocks of salmon we have seen in recent years. So I think it is important that we not only fund more to protect our watersheds, because they are important, because British Columbians rely on water that comes from our watersheds. We do it for drinking and bathing, but we also need to develop better water management strategies so that as we move into a future with climate change, we're able to maintain our water levels within our watershed and not destroy the environment trying to drain lakes or to provide water for British Columbians, so that in the future we're prepared. And then that also comes with providing more fresh and clean drinking water to Indigenous nations, which we have seen the government lag behind, and especially the federal government as well. There are many Indigenous nations who don't have clean drinking water that they need as a basic right that they deserve. I also just want to touch on the fact that I have asked twice now, and I guess the NDP was refusing to commit to a ban of fossil fuel subsidies and fracking. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Adam. Okay, going into another question from the audience. Susan asks, we have been seeing an increase in the number of wildlife in our neighborhood as they have been pushed away from their habitat in the foothills of Burke Mountain due to housing development. Deforestation in the area is also impacting streams and riparian areas. It doesn't seem like there's enough review and monitoring of the impacts of development on wildlife, fish-bearing streams, etc. So impacts on the development of wildlife, fish-bearing streams, and other environmental issues in that local area. How are these issues being taken into consideration by the province? Adam, you answer first.
Thank you. Yeah, so we see the continued development up Burke Mountain. We can only go so far. We already see these lovely huge trees being chopped down from more and more development, and we don't see any act to either make these houses affordable for people or to make multi-unit housing or to expand upwards in a low and middle income bracket. And that's something we need to see increase within our riding, as well as when trees get cut down, when we lose these environmental spaces, we are only pushing ourselves closer to wildlife, but wildlife is forced to come into contact with us, where we have seen in Coquitlam-Burke Mountain, bears repeatedly having to be put down because of us, because we are too immature to realize we shouldn't be feeding these animals. We need to establish so that they have an environment to be in, an urban environment where they can still survive, but not having to interact with humans. We need to prevent more deforestation within our riding, because deforestation only leads to more erosion, more pollutants in our rivers, in our streams. That makes it harder for salmon. It makes it harder for everything. The entire ecosystem suffers when one species suffers. And so I think what we need to do is just reevaluate why we need to expand up the mountain, instead of looking at other strategies to develop better housing that's more condensed so we can protect our environment and invest in urban wildlife spaces.
Great, thanks, Adam. And Finn, I'll just summarize the question quickly. How will the province tackle deforestation due to development in the area, especially its effect on wildlife, fish-bearing streams, biodiversity concerns, and more? Finn, you have 90 seconds.
Yeah, wildlife, animal, and human conflict is unfortunately too typical in growing communities like Coquitlam-Burke Mountain. I mean, it's a beautiful, British Columbia is a beautiful place to live, but we're, as you mentioned, Hussein, off the top, we have incredible abundance of biodiversity, and that attracts people from around the world to come and live here, which creates the conflict that we've had with housing versus wildlife habitat. As a city councillor back in 2002, I started working on these issues because the development of Burke Mountain was coming, and one of the things that I was pushing for was wildlife corridors, streamside protection, retention of trees, smart growth, and making sure that there were proper amenities in the community if we were to develop. The province can play a role by working with municipalities to ensure that there are strong regulations to protect our forests and to ideally continue or work with compact communities to make sure that we have livable communities and to provide the enforcement necessary for wildlife human interaction. Because education is a big part of learning how to work together with nature.
Great, thanks, Finn. Okay, we'll do, so it's 6:45, so we'll probably do about 2 more questions. Jenny asks, we are in the midst of a global biodiversity crisis and BC's fish and wildlife are experiencing steep declines. BC has the most endangered species in Canada, yet remains one of the few industrialized jurisdictions in the world without an endangered species law. If elected, what will your government do to protect BC's endangered species and other fish and wildlife? Finn, you can go first.
Thank you, Hussein. And Jenny for the question. That is absolutely true. BC is blessed with an abundance of wildlife, including an amazing, with the Fraser River, one of the world's greatest salmon rivers. And it is true that they're in trouble. Those runs are in trouble. There are a multitude of cumulative impacts, from fish farms to climate change to habitat loss to pollution. In terms of species at risk, scientists like UBC biologist Sally Otto have urged the provincial NDP to take action to protect endangered species. The bottom line is, without meaningful protection and restoration measures, we risk losing these creatures forever. I don't want that. New Democrats don't want that. It's another reason why I'm running. I want to build on the good work of the BC NDP and add my voice on this issue to the BC NDP caucus. I want to be a productive member of the caucus that has built on good work that has been doing. Minister George Heyman has put forward has done good work over the last 3.5 years. Can we do better? Absolutely. And I want to join him and many other colleagues to move forward to do even more to protect our critical species at risk, their ecosystems and habitats. And I, if elected, intend to do just that.
Perfect. Thanks, Finn. And Adam, if elected, what would your government do to protect BC's endangered species and other fish and wildlife?
Yes, so I would fight for personally an endangered species law to protect our endangered species immediately. And we need to start cataloging them more. We need to invest more funding to figure out how many of these species are left, where are their habitats. And we need to, once we identify the endangered species, we need to protect all of their habitats so that no industry on those habitats until at least the bare minimum until they're recovered and they're taken off an endangered species list and law and from their protection. We are in the middle of a mass extinction event as a result of climate change, and we need to act on that. We don't see urgency from our government. It's just sort of business as normal, but we're in a mass extinction event, one of only few in our entire history as far as back as we can go. And it's estimated we could be losing thousands of species a year in the future. And even now we are losing so many species every year. It's unacceptable. Species who go extinct cannot come back. We cannot get these species back into our ecosystems. And once they leave our ecosystems, they damage these ecosystems and they weaken our entire province and our entire ecosystem. When it's like a domino effect, once one species goes, the next species goes, and then we have complete biodiversity collapse eventually. And while it may seem far off now, it's not that far off. Once we lose one species here, one species there, the ecosystem collapses. And then we have a much more serious problem, not only for British Columbians, but for Indigenous people who rely on those animals.
There you go. Great, thanks, Adam. Okay. Rob asks, Section 3 of BC's Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act requires that in consultation and collaboration with Indigenous peoples, the government must take all measures necessary to ensure the laws of BC are consistent with the declaration. What would this mean for BC's government and nature resource laws over the next 4 years under your government? Adam?
Yes. So I think what we need, one of the things that would be important to do is bring together legal experts within our law system, but also legal experts from Indigenous communities. And we have them as a task force analyze which of our laws do not align with UNDRIP. And it is important we follow that, not only because it's a law, but we need to begin to remove colonialism from our government. Right now, we still have a colonial government. We still do not respect Indigenous peoples. We do not respect their laws. We do not respect their land as they deserve in that dignity. So we need to immediately establish this task force to analyze all of our laws and to make it fair so that Indigenous people are being heard and their lands are being respected by our government.
Great, thanks, Adam. And Finn, considering BC's Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People, what does this mean for BC's environmental and natural resource laws over the next 4 years under your government?
Thank you, Hussein, for the question. I mentioned that in 2019, the province of British Columbia became the first to enshrine the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People into law. So that is a critical first step, is accepting and putting into law a new way of governing the province. That's a more meaningful way to move forward with shared decision making. There has been progress. The courts are recognizing how governments need to work with Indigenous governments. And that is a critical area of collaboration that we need to respect and work together. It will take time to figure out territorial arrangements and governance working together and figuring out whose jurisdiction applies to what, and whether it's resource use or on environmental protection. I am I would like to commit to focusing working closely with First Nations to protect the critical species that are at risk, to work on salmon, to work on restoring where we can in areas, watershed restoration, work with guardians, and improve the shared jurisdiction. But definitely recognizing First Nation jurisdiction is critical on that path moving forward.
Great, thank you, Finn. And thank you both for all your answers. This is our last question. The last question ties back to the declaration and comes from Jack. If elected, will you commit dedicating funding and resources to support and advance Indigenous-led conservation initiatives across the province through the use of federal, provincial, and Indigenous land use designations? Finn?
Yes, thanks, Jack, for the question. And absolutely, if elected, a BC NDP government will commit to funding and expanding funding for reconciliation and working with Indigenous governments and communities to ensure that we can move forward on shared decision making. I feel this is the way forward. I mentioned earlier that courts in the federal jurisdiction as well as in the province have also recognized First Nation claims, and we need to also as government recognize that as we move together and also work with local jurisdictions, municipalities, and regional governments. It is one of the best ways that we can ensure productive solutions. And I feel that the watershed unit at the watershed level is the best way to bring forward First Nations, provincial government, communities, business, labor, working together for solutions. And that means that there needs to be enhanced funding for partners like First Nations. And we're committed to maintaining and enhancing our programs moving forward.
Thanks, Finn. And Adam, I'll just give you the question one more time. If elected, will you commit dedicating funding and resources to support and advance Indigenous-led conservation initiatives across the province through the use of federal, provincial, and Indigenous land use designations?
Yes, yeah, I would definitely support funding and support increasing funding to make sure that Indigenous people not only have the ability to conserve their land in partnership with every level of government, but also so that they can get more control over their land and so they can begin to restore the land that we have damaged. I think it's important that Indigenous people have this control of their land. And I think it's important we increase funding so that Indigenous people have the tools and resources to protect their land for now and for their generations to come. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Adam. So we're nearing the end of our program. We're coming close to 7 o'clock. Thank you everyone who submitted questions for the candidates, and our apologies if we didn't have time to get to yours. I'll now give each candidate one more chance to speak directly to our audience. Fin, you'll be up first. You have 2 minutes to give your closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Hussein. And I'd like to thank CPAWS for hosting tonight's event. I have a strong commitment to conservation, a proven track record on the environment. Following my first Fraser River swim, I founded a nonprofit charity dedicated to improving the health of the Fraser River and its 34 riversheds. As a city councillor, I fought for and achieved streamside protection in Coquitlam and introduced a zero waste motion, which became policy in Metro Vancouver. As a member of parliament, I promoted ocean health and introduced legislation to ban oil tankers off BC's north coast, to transition fish farms to land, and to implement a shark fin ban in Canada, which became law in 2019. My main competitor, the incumbent Liberal MLA, didn't care enough to show up tonight for this important debate. She didn't want to answer your tough questions on the environment or defend the BC Liberals' 16 years of record of environmental cuts and deregulation. In 2017, the Liberals won this riding by 87 votes. We can't let that happen again. On October 24th, help send a strong environmental advocate to Victoria by voting for Fin Donnelly, BC NDP candidate for Coquitlam-Burke Mountain. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Fin. And Adam, your final thoughts.
I'm proud to be a candidate of the BC Green Party, not only because we put forward the best environmental policy, the best conservation policy, but we look at everything through a climate lens. So not just our environmental policies, but our policies on the economy, our policies on business, our policies on housing, all of that will always have climate change as one of the forefront issues that we look at when making policy decisions. We're also proud to put Indigenous issues first in our policies to make sure that Indigenous people are consulted and have the ability to be involved with government. Well, I may not have the best shot in this riding of being elected. I will continue to fight, and the 125,000 other people who went to Vancouver to protest the NDP's inaction on the climate change. And we will continue to fight for the ban of fossil fuel subsidies and ban on fracking in BC, because these are the issues that matter, while continuing to push for conservation within our environments, expansion of environment, either through public parks, environmental protection areas, protecting endangered species, and protecting our most critical ecosystems, while banning all old growth logging in BC. So I want to thank everybody who came here tonight, everybody who managed to host the debate, everybody who asked the great questions, and everybody who's watching. Thank you, and I hope to earn your vote on October 24th.
Great, thanks, Adam. And that brings us to the end of tonight's town hall. Thank you guys so much for a beautiful exchange of ideas and for letting me moderate. I'll turn things back to Sarah for some final remarks.
Thank you so much, Hussein, for leading us through this important conversation. I think every time we hear these discussions about nature protection, climate change, and the environment, it reminds us how critical it is to have these discussions. So on behalf of the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, British Columbia, I want to thank you all for tuning in today. Of course, I want to give a big thank you to our candidates, Adam Bremner-Akins of the BC Green Party and Fin Donnelly with the BC NDP, for taking time out of this very busy election season and for their thoughtful responses. I invite everyone who's watching today to continue this conversation, have this conversation with your friends, with your loved ones, with your candidates, and of course, with Joan Isaacs of the BC Liberal Party, who, as was mentioned earlier, declined to attend this town hall tonight. I hope that you can all find a way to put nature on your ballot. Advanced voting for the 2020 BC election is now open. If you received a mail-in voting package, it is recommended that you mail it no later than tomorrow, October 17th, to ensure that it is received in time for your vote to be counted. You can also drop your mail-in ballot off at your local voting place or an electoral office. General election voting day will be held on Saturday, October 24th. More information on all the ways to vote can be found by visiting electionsbc.ca. That's all from us. Thank you again on behalf of CPAWS-BC for watching, and good night.
Thank you, folks. We'll be ending the live stream now.